No, it was spot on. Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. Today is August 30th, actually. Week's gone by fast. 2023. Today, we are here in the Commissioner's Conference Room in the Commissioner's office on the second floor of the Larimer County Administrative Services Building. We are here for a work session with Behavioral Health Services to present the 2023 Impact Grant Fund Award recommendations. I am Larimer County Commissioner Jody Shaw-McNally, Chair of the Board of County Commissioners, and I welcome you to this really important and exciting session. I'm joined at the conference table today by my colleagues, Larimer County Commissioner John Cafalas and Larimer County Commissioner Kristen Stevens. Also, we have with us our County Manager, Lorenda Volker, and we have some other important folks from Behavioral Health Services today, but I will let our Director of Human and Economic Services, Laura Walker, introduce everyone and start and kick off our session today. Laura, I'm really excited about some of these grant awards. Really looking forward to hearing this presentation. I've chaired the Policy Council. I've already heard this, but I'm looking forward to diving more into it. So thank you and welcome everyone.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner. Again, I am Laura Walker. I serve as the Human and Economic Health Director for the county. And within that service area falls the Behavioral Health Services Department. And I am currently serving as the interim director for that department as we look to fill a vacancy in that specific seat. So I am happy to hand most of this presentation over to Jessica Plummer. She is the manager over this grant program and has been doing so for several years. As you know, this was the first way for the county to start infusing the tax revenues of the ballot initiative that was passed in 2018 to immediately try to fill gaps in behavioral health services in our community. It's been a very successful program. It's been a very popular program. I don't want to steal too much thunder from Jessica, but we had more than double, almost triple the amount of requests in this grant cycle than we had available funds to give out to the community. So it was a very deliberate process. We have a lot of steps in our process that Jessica's going to go through to show the community that we are using every resource we can to make a good assessment of the proposals that are being brought forward and really put these dollars to the best use that we can to fill these gaps in the community. So from there, I'm going to let Jessica introduce herself and take the presentation from here.
Good afternoon, Jessica. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Again, I'm Jessica Plummer, and I'm the Program Manager for the Behavioral Health Services Department. Today, we're going to go over, like Laura said, just an overview of the evaluation process, so everything that's led us up to this point and the recommendations that we're bringing forward to you today. We're going to go over the application and recommendation overview and some data and trends that we're starting to see over time, and then break that down in terms of our funding recommendations by award type. And by award type, we mean the different targeted project areas that are set forth by our advisory groups. And we'll answer questions and then talk about next steps and guidance moving forward. So hopefully this diagram looks a little bit familiar to you. It's one that we shared last year, and it hasn't changed much since last year. This is the kind of the evaluation process that we go through. This grant cycle, we had the grant period open for applications June 1st through June 30th. And so when we receive those applications in July and August is when we do most of our evaluations. And so this kind of walks you through that step-by-step process of what that looks like. So initially, we go through a pre-screening process to make sure that all the grant applications that are submitted are complete and we have all the correct documentation so that nobody can kind of fall through the cracks if something is missing or they uploaded the wrong document or things like that. We also do some due diligence on the background of the organizations just to make sure they're not debarred or suspended from receiving federal funds. And then we go through our alignment and capacity review. So there's 4 different criteria that we evaluate for on these grants. The first 2 are alignment and capacity, and the second 2 are context and impact. And so what our staff does in that initial review is review applications in terms of, does it meet our ballot language? What is the capacity of the organization, the financial capacity to take on the work that's being proposed? And so our staff go through that. And they have a specific scoring rubric to make sure, yes, it falls within the ballot language. Can it be funded, yes or no? And it gets a kind of a risk score in case of, they they have a higher financial risk than maybe some other ones. But otherwise, they move forward in the process and they go through to our subject matter expert review. And those are, this year we had 18 external grant reviewers, so people in the behavioral health space, some that might participate in some of our advisory groups. And they help to determine programmatically whether or not those grant applications are going to have a significant impact on the behavioral health outcomes in our community. And so they evaluate, again, a scoring rubric that has community context, collaboration, health equity improvement, the proven or possibility of success, and the impact for the cost of the program. And so once it goes through those 3 rounds, and I should say each grant reviewer this year got around 13 applications, and so each application got 3 reviews by 3 external reviewers. And so those scores are averaged and brought to our executive review panel. And so when they get to our executive review panel, they get to actually see the whole portfolio. So this year we received 78 applications and 72 made it to our executive review. And so they actually review the entire portfolio. So what happens is most of these grants that come through say, yes, we'd like to fund this, we recommend it for award. And the difficult thing for the executive panel to do is to go through and say, hey, we only have $2.8 million. And this year, and you'll see on next slide, we received $7.5 million in requests for $2.8 million in funding. And so generally when it goes through this process, we have more say we want to fund than we have the ability to do. So they have the tough job of prioritizing those awards and saying what do we think we can fund with the amount of funding that we have available. And then they also nominate one for our Gary A. Darling Award, which is just a grant award that is for the intersection of behavioral health and criminal justice that we established in 2020 to commemorate the service of Gary A. Darling for his work in that space over his 30-year career. And so last week, we brought this to our Behavioral Health Policy Council, and so we provided them with a very similar packet to what you have here today, this one, that details all of the grant applications, the ones that were recommended for award and the ones that were recommended for decline. And they recommended bringing that to our Board of County Commissioners for the work session here today, and then hopefully bring it forth next week for the Administrative Matters meeting for approval next week. So that's just the overview of the process. Again, on the bottom, we have just a decline process. If they don't complete the application or they're not eligible, they tend to drop off, or if they have, if they don't align with our ballot language, then they don't move forward in the process. For context and impact, if all subject matter experts say we wouldn't recommend this to move forward, then they don't move forward in the process. And so you can see that here on the next slide where we had 78 applications submitted. Only one, it didn't meet the eligibility criteria, so it didn't move through. In the initial review, we had 2 drop off because they actually weren't behavioral health related. And then we had 3 drop off in the subject matter expert review panel because all 3 subject matter experts said no. So our executive review team reviewed 72 of the 78 that were recommended for award. And then they had 35 that were recommended for award and 43 recommended for decline. And so that is what was brought to our policy council and here today. When there's a question.
Commissioner Stevens.
Yeah, so with those who didn't receive an award or who fell off, do they get, what kind of notification do they get? Do they get a notification about why they weren't chosen? How detailed is that?
At this point, nobody has received any notice of award or decline. That will happen, yes, that will happen on Tuesday, September 5th, assuming they're move forward with approval from you guys at the Administrative Matters meeting. We do send out notice of award or notice of decline, and I do have conversations with a lot of grantees when they aren't funded to give them feedback because we have all that documented in our system with our grant reviewers. There's substantial feedback from staff in narrative form. It's hard to aggregate, but on a one-on-one conversation, I share that with a lot of grantees, and it's actually been helpful because you can see grantees that didn't make it the first year that received feedback, they improved their application and have been awarded either the next year or the year after.
Yeah, that's good to know. Just, I mean, obviously, they're all community partners, and so it's good to kind of...
Even the ones that are awarded, we give feedback because they like that too. It's actually part of our onboarding call that we have with all of our grantees as well. We go through the expectations for the award, make sure we're on the same page, and then part of that I have also to give the feedback to on their application.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's it for, please proceed.
Okay. So again, we received 78 grant applications this year from 72 unique organizations. So we did have a couple organizations submit more than one grant request, and that's because they had very separate and distinct programs that didn't want to be commingled with one another. So as I mentioned, we had $7.5 million in requests, which is up significantly. We'll see on the next slides when we do some trend data. It was only at 5.1 last year, and we received about 55 applications. This year we got 78 and $7.5 million in requests. But the number of awarded applications is similar, and the recommendation is for $2,816,731 is recommended for award. Our current budget and allocation is $2.8 million, which was increased last year from the 2.5 million. So this just goes over that amount because we didn't want to cut off a grant arbitrarily just to meet the exact number. And last year, I believe we had offered two tiers, tier 1 and tier 2. And this year, we don't have that just because the facility is opening. We didn't want to overcommit some of our grant dollars with some of the unforeseen costs of opening that facility. So this is just a quick history and background for those that might be less familiar with the grant program before I go into detail on some of the data. 2019 and 2020 were just a little bit different years, and so when we're trending our data over time, just want to highlight that 2019 was $1 million, and a lot of it was gone out through invitation-only process, and then in 2022, we had carved off $115,000 for our crisis response grant awards, and so because there was more awards, or it was done differently in different amounts, we can't kind of trend that year over year. So when I go into the data on the next slide, it starts from 21 to 23. And so you can just see how the history of that. And then I'd already mentioned we had increased our allocation last year from the 2.5 to the 2.8. So this is how the application data and trends over time, again, from 2021 moving forward, when things have been fairly consistent, that we can easily track things year over year. The amount requested was continuing to go up at a slow rate, and then you see that big jump in 2023. We also see the average amount requested increasing, and but the median amount hasn't changed too much. Again, we received 78 applications. We had been seeing pretty consistently that 50 to 60 number for the last 4 years, so this was really kind of unexpected. And the number of awards has remained fairly consistent. The number of declines obviously went up because we received so many more that we couldn't fund. And then number of partial awards was reduced a little bit to 17, so we didn't partially fund as many organizations, but we do continue to have to partially fund some organizations because a lot of them came back this year and asked for double the amount of what they wanted, or they wanted to grow their program, and we simply didn't have the dollars to do that. And so some of those are just keeping them at the level that they're at without growing the program. So we didn't just randomly cut a lot of budgets. It was just we couldn't fund the increase. And so that's why there's still a fair number of partial awards.
Commissioner Kafalis.
I have a couple of questions, but for now, Jessica, could you speak a little bit closer to the mic? You talk kind of fast,
Okay,
and I'm not picking up everything you're saying.
sure.
If you would be kind enough to do that, please.
Yes, I will try to do that.
I'll wait till the end of this part before I ask my questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Certainly, Commissioner Kafalis, I appreciate you asking for that. So I wanted to just note, and maybe because I've been looking at this for a few weeks now, I don't know if you mentioned this or maybe my colleagues noticed this, but there's a lot of asks for staffing and operations in this, and I don't know if you felt that was an increase from years past. It seemed to stick out for me, and I didn't, and so I'm just curious if that's something that you all felt like you saw, or maybe the grantee evaluators and teams. I'm just curious about your thoughts on that.
I think that's a consistent thing we see year over year. We've done some analysis on the grants that have been awarded in the past, and about 60 to 70% of those funds are going to some sort of staffing. So I don't know if it was any more than what we've seen in the past. I mean, there was certainly more because we received so many more applications, but a lot of them were for staffing, and we did notice as we were going through some of the grant applications that a lot had said that they had lost funding for some of their positions. I don't know if that was due to, receiving some stimulus funding and that kind of going away, and asking for BHS to kind of pick up the other half of those funded positions, so.
One of the things that I've noticed in response to your question, Commissioner, is that a couple of years ago, when we really were in that lockdown period for COVID, we did see some more requests for things like IT types of equipment and infrastructure types of things coming in. But, really at the core of things, in contrast to, say, physical healthcare, medical healthcare, there's a lot less need for equipment and those type of things. It's really the one-on-one interaction with clinicians that tend to be the vast majority of the service offerings that really are therapeutic to help people get through these issues. So I don't think it's uncommon, but I do think there's been a little bit of change over time, partly from that COVID impact and trying to get further into telehealth and better access for people.
Great, and I see your hand, Commissioner. Let me just follow up with with my question real quick. So I think maybe just a couple of them stuck out for me because it seemed like a lot of the grants, and I know that some of them for full positions and things like that, and maybe workforce capacity, because of the need is so great, is increasing capacity anyway because of the more resources that are needed. So I didn't know if that also might be something that we're seeing. So just some thoughts I had, it just kind of stuck in my head that I saw a lot of need for workforce and for supporting those things. So Commissioner Kofals, thanks for your patience.
You're welcome. As a follow-up to that question, whenever we're looking at staffing issues are not a one-off. So I know we've had this conversation in the past, but if we're funding personnel, staffing, clinicians, these organizations, how are they going to sustain that in the long term? And then I have one more question.
So one of the things, as part of the executive review team this year, which I was one of the 3 folks that was part of that process, I did ask the question about whether or not, we have a standard question in our software system that asks about sustainability for people that are repeat grant applicants. It's not something that we require for all grant applications, and I did make the suggestion that maybe we might think about that for the 2025 process or 2024 process to make sure that we are asking upfront, even for new grant applications, what the sustainability plan is if they would receive this money for only a 1-year term. The other thing that we are looking at that has been slowed down a little bit, our trajectory had been to potentially have multi-year funding available to the community, have those opportunities be carved out from our normal process of only 12 months at a time. However, with the advent of the facility opening in December, I felt it was premature to have that be something that's implemented in 2024, but it is still on the radar for us to take a look at and see if multi-year funding for some of these critical services in order to help with that sustainability of personnel question might be an appropriate use of some of these funds over the longer term.
May I?
Yes, please proceed, Commissioner.
I think that answers my question, at least in part. However, it's still not clear to me what did these organizations say in the application or once they received their notification. If they're receiving funds and those funds are predominantly paying for staffing, do they say in the application how they're going to fund that position next year until we consider, some type of multi-year funding that might help with some of that sustainability?
So I think there's very few positions that we
I
fund.
can't hear you. I don't know why.
There's very few positions, I think, that we fund 100%. A lot of nonprofits have a lot of braided funding, and so a lot of the requests are a partial FTEs, and so we're not the primary funding source for a lot of those. Given that behavioral health is sometimes only a proportion of somebody's workload, it's not their entire thing if they're doing.
So when you
Other.
reviewed the application and all the different steps, which are very good, and thank you for all of that, then it is made clear up front that this is braided funding, or that
Yes.
they're requesting partial funding for these FTEs?
Yes, so in the application, there's a very detailed budget template that they fill out, as well as they provide other funding sources, and they detail out those line items, who's being funded at what percent of their FTE when they're putting in their request.
May I ask one more? I think it's on this theme.
Yes, and then I just
one.
want to do a quick time check too, just to make sure, because we do
Right,
have
right.
another work session after this. Thank you.
Otherwise, I'll forget.
Go ahead.
So,
Related to staffing, FTE,
let's move on.
okay.
Commissioner, if you remember what you'd like to ask, just raise your hand and we'll stop. So, Commissioner Stevens? Okay, thanks. Go ahead, Jessica, thanks.
So this is just a little bit more data, the number of new grantees or organizations applying. And so, again, we had seen that kind of trending downward because we had the same organizations applying year over year. And then again, we saw that jump in 2023. The number of new programs follows kind of a similar trend. And new programs we define as organizations that we funded before that are applying for a different program that we've funded in the past. And then the number of continuations, as we've funded organizations, they continue to apply year over year. So this next graph is just the funding recommendations by type, and so by targeted project area. And if you recall, these are the targeted project areas that were defined by our Technical Advisory Committee and our Consumer Advisory Committee in the work session they do each spring. And this is where the applications fall and where the awards are made or suggested, recommended for award. And so you can see that the two biggest ones are really care coordination and expansion of child and youth services. And this is kind of a similar graph to what we've seen the last couple of years of where we're seeing the applications come through and where they're getting awarded. And so we do have, even though that there was a lot declined in the care coordination bucket, we are, the department is funding a lot of care coordination through the opening of our facility and through Summits Down through those care coordinations. There are going to be 12 at that facility. So even though we're not funding it here as much in this, as it appears in this graph, it is being funded and supported through the department through other means. So again, the 39% for the expansion of child and youth services is pretty similar what we've seen year over year. And the next chart is just a graph to show how that breaks down with just the awards, not the declines. And so you can see we've dedicated about 85% of that 2.8 million to the targeted areas of focus. So really refining that, but leaving space for things that may not fit into those bucket areas, but are also, helping to reduce stigma or something like that in the community that are kind of new and innovative and don't necessarily fit into those buckets. And so that's actually some feedback from our policy council was to make sure we have that trend line from year over year. And I can tell you was 75% the first year, about 90% last year, and 85% this year. So it's a majority of the portfolio is going to those targeted areas that were defined by our advisory groups. So we have 23 continuations this year. We have 6 new programs and 6 new grantees. And so some of the ones I wanted to highlight are some of these new ones because you probably haven't heard them before, so they're kind of new and exciting to talk about. So the 6 new grantees is the Crossroads Ministry of Estes Park. And so they provide a lot of basic needs up in the Estes Park area, and they're looking to hire a in-house mental health counseling. And so they have actually 2 staff already picked out that live up there, provide services up there that are going to be helping to take those referrals and provide those counseling to an organization that's a trusted member of the community where people are already going for services and kind of get that additional support. And so that's supposed to support about 120 rural Estes Park community members. The second one is Psychological Services Center at Colorado State University. So this is for a workforce grant. It is an internship program to have a few different interns working at the Psychological Services Center to provide services to clients, as well as get the supervision and the work experience through their academic instructors. And then the third one is Lighthouse, and this is for, they provide sober living, and so they're helping those that are transitioning from either a homelessness, jail, or a detox facility, and so that critical month when they're trying to transition into recovery, this is for peer support training, and so for others that are also in sober living to help get some peer support training to help others through the recovery process to help prevent people from relapsing or going back into crisis. The fourth one is Centennial Area Health Education Center. This is a similar proposal. It's a mobile mental health exhibit. I would say similar to kind of the Mental Health Mind Matters exhibit that was here at the Fort Collins Museum of Discovery. It was successful there, and so this is an opportunity to bring that to other areas of the county. And so they will have a presence in Fort Collins, but also have signed agreements in Loveland and Estes Park to bring that exhibit up there. So they're looking to reach about 5,000 community members through that mental health exhibit. We have Disabled Resource Services, and they're looking to contract a therapist to provide 200 therapy sessions, provide support groups and trainings for those with disabilities. And the last one is First Responder Trauma Services, formerly First Responder Trauma Counselors. So this is transitioning to their nonprofit arm. And they actually provided us with 4 options in the grant application, Tier 1, 2, 3, and 4. We selected Tier 3 to fund, which is providing education and training for peer support to a lot of the first responder, volunteer firefighter departments in Larimer County. And what's exciting about this one is that we've actually funded Estes Valley Fire Protection District and the Lions Fire Protection District in the past. And what this does is, instead of those 2 organizations applying individually, this application or this organization has taken kind of a more system level approach, and they're going to provide that peer support training to all the 15 different first responder volunteer fire departments in the county, because not all of them have the capacity to take on that peer support, and it was growing and it was successful. That other of those, some other agencies really wanted that in their practice as well, and so they kind of set the model for that, and they're going to be helping that. And in their application, they actually had all 15 fire protection districts sign letters of support that they wanted this to happen, so that was really exciting. So these are new grantees, which is the first time an organization has been awarded. And then we have our new programs. So how we define that is organizations that have been awarded previously, but the program has changed. So something is new about these, or we haven't funded these particular organizations in a couple of years. The first one is the Harmony Foundation. So previously we'd been funding substance use scholarships for those that needed treatment and recovery. And this year they are adding recovery coach certification and training, and they're going to be training 20 community members and 5 staff members to become recovery coaches. So they also have that those resources up in the Estes Park community, in addition to the scholarships. The next one is UC Health Northern Colorado Foundation. So we've funded them in the past for a few different initiatives. This one is new. It's for a co-responder program with the city of Fort Collins. So the intention there is to fund a co-responder. The Center for Family Outreach, we've also funded in the past. This one is for a different need because they've just opened their Teen Activity Center. And so this is to provide a case manager in that Teen Activity Center so that they can, the youth that are there can also get access to services in a timely manner, being where they already are. We have the Matthews House, and this is for experiential education programming, so a variety of different programs to reach about 200 at-risk youth. We have Every Child Pediatrics. They do school-based health centers, and this particular one is for up in Wellington, Wellington Middle School. And then we have Three Hopeful Hearts, which is peer support for about 120 bereaved parents and grandparents who have lost a child. So those are the highlights for some of the new programs we look to fund this year, which is about a third of the portfolio. This is just a recommendation for award by type, so basically a shorter condensed version of the packet that you have of just the names of the organizations, the amounts, and the total for that category. So I've kind of gone through, talked about some of these already, but the Health District of Northern Larimer County is to provide services to just Southern Larimer County residents. That's something we funded in the past that we want to continue to support, to continue that service array for providing access to those in Loveland and Berthoud. The Housing Catalyst is for a behavioral health clinician that helps retain people their housing. And Northern Colorado Health Alliance is for care coordination. And Outreach Fort Collins is for outreach to their Midtown expansion. In the Alternatives and Interventions in Criminal Justice targeted project area, the one that was nominated this year for the Gary A. Darling Award is that UC Health Northern Colorado Foundation grant. We also, the 8th Judicial District Attorney's Office was actually the award winner for that last year. And so again, that just goes to the best application for the intersection of behavioral health and criminal justice. And then for those, just so that the acronym, I'll have to fix this for the award announcement. The CNDC stands for Colorado Nonprofit Development Center, doing business as Yarrow Collective. So they are the fiscal sponsor for the Yarrow Collective, which is an organization we funded for the past several years that started out from a grant from CSU, Colorado State University, to build that organization that's now a 501c3. Expansion of child and youth services. The one I actually wanted to highlight on here for you is that Early Childhood Council of Larimer County. It is the largest award we have this year, and it is the one that, because of the new signature authority thresholds, is the one that's going to be coming to the Board of County Commissioners for signature. The rest will go to either Laura Walker or Lorenda. So Lorenda, just a heads up, you have about 22 coming towards you this year, assuming these are moved through as recommended. And Laura has 12, and the Board of County Commissioners would have 1 based on those new signature authority thresholds. And this one is large because it's actually got a sub-award to the Willow Collective. So previously, those two organizations have applied separately, and they actually have a very good synergistic partnership where the Early Childhood Council of Larimer County is the primary award, and they have a sub-award to the Willow Collective to provide services, to allow them to continue to provide services and let the Early Childhood Council of Larimer County take on the administrative work of doing all the financial reporting and things of that nature so that they can focus on their work. And these are what we have in the responsive categories. So the one I want to highlight on here is that Fort Collins Museum of Discovery. It was actually our highest scoring award this year, and they are providing this is to provide 3 specific events at the Museum of Discovery, which is the Teen Self-Care Fair, Autism Resource Fair, and a book fair. And it's really become a hub for a lot of our grantee organizations to have to host events and to have like a neutral space where there's not a lot of stigma involved in learning about mental health, and it's a safe place for, I think, teens and youth to come and learn about mental health. And so everybody that reviewed this application was really excited about it. Again, one of the highest scoring ones, and as I've seen through working with a lot of the other grantee partners, they all use this as a hub in the community. So do we have any questions?
Commissioner Gonzalez, did you remember your question? Or you have other questions? Go ahead, sir.
Yes, I remembered that question, and I have a second one that pertains to this part of our discussion. And my question is, please, would you explain again the methodology? You may have, but I didn't get it all. But the methodology for determining partial grant awards versus full grant awards. And when you do that, or in the application process, do the organizations articulate if they don't get all the money they were asking for, how are they going to do what they said they were going to do? So what is the methodology again, please? And do they make it clear how they're going to do what they're going to do if they don't get all the money? Thank you very much. And then I have one more, that's all. Sure.
Yeah, so two things. One, there's a question in the application about the need and what happens if they don't receive the funds, so they can actually articulate that in an application. Some of the methodology it's not on here, but we actually have a categorized list of, as part of our evaluation process. It actually, part of it went to our policy council, so that level of detail just doesn't rise to this meeting, but we have things that are disallowable. So they're asking for things that we cannot fund, large pieces of equipment that have depreciation over time that wouldn't necessarily fit our one-year period of performance. If they are asking for things that, like a housing position that is not necessarily relevant to behavioral health, so making sure they fit the ballot language needs and initiatives. So there are things that are asked that may not be something that we can fund. Also, in terms of partial funding, we do take into account making sure that we're not kind of funding half a lifeboat, basically that they can't move forward with their program as proposed with only providing partial funding.
I would just add, and I think this might have been mentioned earlier as well, but for several of our applications where there was a continuation request for funding, they may have been asking for additional FTE or other expenses to expand an existing program, and we may have said, you know, given the amount of ask that we have and the amount of resources available, we would love to allow you to continue the service at the level that you've been providing it, but we can't afford the expansion. So that would be another major reason that we might give a partial award.
Yeah, that was one of the biggest ones, really.
Go ahead, Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thank you. So given that we've seen a significant increase in requests, will you be recommending that we increase the dollar amount that is available to nonprofit organizations from 2.8 million to a higher amount?
I'll take that question. Serving currently as the interim director for this department, I feel very strongly, and it's some of the same rationale that I gave for the delaying of proposing multi-year funding for this program, is that the majority of our revenues at this point, now that the acute care facility at Longview is about to come online, more than half of the tax revenues from that ballot initiative are going to be going towards the operation of the acute care facility. Given the significant investment that's being made there, I believe that it's fiscally responsible for us to take a pause on increasing any other budget line items outside of that until we've had at least a year's worth of experience of knowing what those operations are going to cost, what the capacity really is, and what those outcomes are to the community. So I feel strongly that keeping our other budget line items steady until we have some of that experience is really the most judicious way to do this.
Thank you, Laura. I agree that is a fiscally responsible way to take a bit of a pause until we see how much it's going to cost to run the Longview campus. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Gonzalez. Commissioner Stevens, did you have any questions?
I don't really have any questions. Just want to say thank you for the work. Thank you for, I think obviously we do this every year, and it's good to have the reminders of how the process works. So I really like the evaluation process being kind of laid out like that. That, kind of reminds me how much scrutiny we actually give to all these applications, and how much dedication and time is spent by subject matter experts and executive team and the policy council. And so I am really grateful for that, because there are a lot of asks in our community, and clearly we can't fund everything we'd like to fund. So I think that having a process that's really well spelled out and detailed is really important when you're having to deny so many great applications. But so I just really thank you for the work that you've done here. I'm happy to support your recommendations, because I think you've done the due diligence and the hard work in preparing these. And I appreciate the questions that Commissioner Kafalis was asking about a sustainability beyond the year, but also really understand the idea that, I mean, FTEs is kind of the name of the game. I mean, it's getting providers on the ground in the communities where people need them. So I think that we will likely not see things beyond, FTE kind of requests, programming requests. So thanks for the good work. Yeah, I don't really have any questions. I'm satisfied and happy to take these recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Stevens. I have some questions, but I know Commissioner Kafalis said he had another question, and then I have a couple of comments and questions. Commissioner Kafalis.
So were there any organizations that applied for funds that addressed the needs of the co-occurring needs of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and behavioral health issues? I think from the list that I reviewed, there might have been a couple who kind of work in that space and were declined, and I believe that is a really important need. So I'm wondering about that, Jessica and Laura, and also related to that, if I may, in terms of the review process, which I think is a very excellent review process overall, are there folks involved in it, subject matter experts or lived experience folks or whatever, that are directly connected to the IDD issue? There were two questions embedded in there.
So yes, this year we did see an application specifically for that. It didn't raise to the priority level for funding. However, we did end up funding or recommend for funding the disabled resource services, which is reaching that population as well. So sometimes we see multiple applications for very similar programming, and we kind of end up funding one of those instead of all of them. So we do touch that population in some of the recommendations. We just couldn't fund all of them, even though they're might have been declined. And also as a first-time applicant, I can provide them feedback for next year and have them try again as well.
And my second question related to that, do you recall what it is? Do we have anybody involved in the different levels of review that either is someone with intellectual developmental disability or has a family member or knows the issue well? Thank you.
So I'll start and maybe let Jessica fill in a few more details. First of all, the main area where we focus on people with lived experience providing input to this process is in our Consumer Advisory Committee. Also in our Technical Advisory Committee, in the creation of the priority areas each year that are going to be prioritized for funding out of this program. So that would be the most intense area of focus for that. However, once we get to the stage of subject matter expertise, we're really asking for people who are embedded in the community, who have a broad view over multiple kinds of populations that are in need of mental health and behavioral health service care. And so specific focus on IDD as a singular lens that comes through. I'm not sure that we have a lot of specific examples to provide for that, but I will let Jessica take it from here to talk about the general mix of the subject matter expertise level of the actual review of the applications and see where we have people that are serving that population or have experience with that population.
Yes, we do have a diverse group of people on the grant review panel, so a few that would speak to that population. I think in the determination of those target project areas, the specific populations are not the primary. It's trying to get at the programming that's needed in the community, and part of the role of these grant reviewers is to review the impact on the cost of the program. So sometimes that means taking a deep dive into funding certain programs that, reach 10 people very deeply that might have the co-occurring disorders, substance use, and those tend to be more costly programs than, say, a education or training program that can reach 10,000 people. There's such a wide breadth or depth of different programming that it's really hard to compare apples to apples for those things.
Commissioner, did you want to build on that?
Well, just, I guess we'll close the loop, but I would specifically recommend, it's still not clear to me whether we have anybody in the Consumer Advisory Committee or perhaps in these different levels of review, someone, for example, who's on the autism spectrum or somebody who, is directly dealing with these issues. And I think it's important enough of an issue that I'd like to respectfully suggest for next year that we look at that and see if there's a way to improve in that area.
Yes, well received, and we will make sure that we look at that part of the process with a different lens for next year's selection. Thank you.
And, Commissioner, serving as the liaison and policy chair, council chair, I do believe there are some folks who have, in the technical and some of our other groups that have either lived, like a family member or some lived experience with that, or have some training in that, or some focus. So I do know there is some of that, maybe just not like the national expert on that. There are people that have partials of it. So I wanted to just reassure you that
Well,
that's.
I appreciate that, but I'd like to know then who are those people and what is their level of expertise or their connection directly with the issue? I mean, there's one thing of being an expert, and all of that, but there's somebody who actually lives this stuff and has a family member who's dealing with intellectual developmental disabilities on top of mental health or substance use disorder issues. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for your feedback, Commissioner. I'm going to ask a few questions. I first just want to say, having served on a grant review committee for Human Services Commission for a municipality in Larimer County, and done that for multiple years, and knowing we had like double or triple the asks and how many applications in that process. And I just want to first thank all of the reviewers and the folks who volunteer their time, because I believe these people are volunteering their time and do hours. Sometimes they're spending 30 to 45 minutes per application to review, and knowing how many they had to review, I think you said 77 or 72. I want to thank those folks in our community that have spent a lot of time and effort and dedication, because these are they're very involved, and there's a lot of information to read and digest. And having that experience myself, I want to just say my heartfelt gratitude to those folks for their work. It's very important part of this process. And then I want to thank staff, because you all do that initial review, and you do such great work to work with every application and potential grantee to help them feel like they're heard and supported through this process. That's not always the case. Some of these other processes in other areas and other sectors and across the country are very competitive, and they can be very confusing. It's hard to actually talk to someone to ask your questions. So I wanted to specifically note that you all do a great job connecting with those partners, because they are trying to do good work. And I think you mentioned, Laura, to have some of the paperwork or the grant work done so they can focus on the work they're trying to do, because these are sometimes small organizations and sometimes they're very large. And so I think that's the other beauty of this, as we're supporting kind of some starting groups that have started and have sustained. They've gotten some multiple years of funding, but I think there were 6 or 7 that were brand new when this program started, and now they're still going, and they're expanding and doing great work. And I think we had one of those groups, the Yarrow Collective, come and present in front of us, because they also received an immediate needs grant. So I wanted to take a note of that, pause and take a note of that before I go back to gratitude, is that we did have some folks in the community, our Community Leaders Summit, that talked about us doing more to support nonprofits and nonprofits with workforce and things like that. And I wanted to just say, here's the example of us and other grants and things we do with the Immediate Needs Grant, but this is ongoing behavioral health. These are all nonprofits or local governments or agencies, and this is yearly support that we're getting out into the community, $2.8 million that would not be there if not for the support of the Larimer County voters. So thank you to Larimer County voters for supporting this tax. You can see that yearly we are getting this money out into organizations across the county in multiple areas and diverse settings to reach folks in unique ways, and that is I don't know if that's happening anywhere else. I want to just say thank you to voters, to the volunteers who read these, and to staff. And to Laura, thank you for help shepherding us to the end and helping us come to this conclusion. I think that the diversity of grantees and seeing the workforce issue is really represents what the needs are, because I also hear this in the opioid abatement work. And I see an overlap here with some of the awards happening here and will happening in that space, and that tells me we're all on the right track, and there's an opportunity for that braided and blended funding. And I know those two groups haven't talked, but it might be sometime neat to kind of have maybe the Opioid Abatement Council or that work come and talk and present to Behavioral Health Council to share with that work, because that's 18 years of funding. I know it's only 2 million last year and this year, and then it goes down, but it might be an opportunity to also, since that council's starting to look ahead on how they want to target funding and whether they want to have an RFP process, because we can see that other councils around the state are struggling even getting responses to that, and how much work that is. This is a lot of work. Right, and so this is something I'm wondering if we should have a conversation to see if we can partner or leverage. So maybe there's a partial, maybe that group can fund the rest. I don't know. But first, I want to just say, this is a lot of work. Kudos to you all. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I know you're trying your best to meet every individualized and special sector. I think there's some great awards here. I think it's diverse. I think it's spread out. I see some great community partners. I wish we had more. There's some great community partners that were declined. Seeing over 7 million is stunning, but I also think people know this is a great program. And I think it speaks to both those things. So first, my heartfelt gratitude. I see a lot of great things here, and I just want to commend you for a job well done. And I just appreciate you all and your work. And I thank the partners who applied for these, and they're doing the good work as well. So thank you. So you wanted to, Commissioner Kafalis.
In closing, I also want to say thank you. I hope you don't misunderstand my pushing a little bit, but I recognize this is tremendous work, and so thank you very much for that, everyone involved. And I do support the recommendations that you've provided for our approval, consideration on Tuesday, September 5th, and I recommend it would be a discussion item because it is so important, rather than a consent agenda item.
So I want to make sure we're clear. Their budget includes a $2.5 million grant-making plan. We overrode that. You all overrode that last year to get to the $2.8 million. And that's the recommendation this year as well, which it sounds like you all support. I just want to be really clear that, that we are exceeding the $2.5 million kind of planned for.
Actually, the 2.8 was budgeted, just to clarify,
Was it
sorry.
budgeted at the higher
The
amount?
2.8 was budgeted, we would be going over by 16,000 and some change.
Yeah.
In order to not artificially hold one of the grants back by that 16,000 and some.
And Lorinda, my recollection is that we voted to make that the 2.8 going forward.
Okay.
But we had had that discussion, and I think we even went over to 50,000 last year, and we approved that extra, and then this is the 16. I know it seems like we're going over, but it's just, trying to make sure we don't short someone just even, 5,000. But as I understood it, we had, as I recollect and remember, because I remember these conversations pretty, I was going back to my notes. I think we even recommended last time that we felt that if we could always keep increasing this could grow, but maybe we needed to be at 2.8 for the long term for right now, because we wanted money for the next phase of phase 2 and the potential for the youth, for services and building. And then we knew that we wanted to really pay attention to how this came online, which Lori already restated. I think we had that conversation and voted to do that 0.8 last year.
Fantastic. Thank you. Sorry
That's
for
how
my
that's
confusion.
how I remember, but I could, I could be a little off, but that's how I remember it, so.
I just want to applaud you all for staying within the ballot language. I know that's hard because everything is related to behavioral health. And I know you all put it on the back of your agendas for all the meetings. And so everyone keeps in mind, what did the voters approve these funds for? Because there are so many needs in the community that we could just never meet them all. We obviously can't even meet all the behavioral health related needs. So I think well done on a transparent process. That's really important. Like the commissioner was saying, folks understand why they didn't get it. I love that you provide that feedback to all of the grant applicants, whether they received a grant or did not receive a grant, so they get to talk with you and not just get a letter that says, sorry, we didn't fund you. Because I imagine there's not one application that wouldn't serve well people in our community. So to the members of the review committee, Laura, you this year, thank you for doing that. For the Behavioral Health Policy Council, for the folks that set the framework in the Technical Advisory Committee and the Consumer Advisory Committee. Everyone has an important role in this because it's the community's money that you all are making recommendations about to the board. So thank you for that.
And I do support being a discussion item. I think it's great to make sure that the public understand the amount of work that goes into this. Commissioner Stevens, I didn't know if you had commented on that.
I already had commented on the work,
Discussion?
so.
No, do you want it to be discussion or consent agenda?
It sounds like there's appetite for a discussion item, so that sounds fine to me.
Okay, I just want to make sure, to hear what your thoughts on that. I didn't know. So, thank you, Lorenza, for your comments. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. I want to just shout out to Taylor, too, who's here from the Behavioral Health Services. And just well done. Thank you. And I look forward to our next steps and continuing the work and seeing you all in a couple of weeks on September 22nd. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So at 2:29, we are adjourned.